It began as a band that didn't work, so the band stopped pretending it should. Guitars were replaced, faces were removed, silence became optional, repetition did the heavy lifting, concepts replaced explanations. Albums stopped being releases and turned into instructions. Live shows fixed what the records broke. Awards arrived after everything was already finished. Less access, more control. You're entering the story of Daft Punk. Before Daft Punk became robots, they were just another band trying very hard to matter. Early 90s, Paris wasn't exactly waiting for electronic legends. So Thomas Bangalter and Guy Manuel de Homem Christo did what everyone else did. They picked up guitars. The band was called Darlin. It was loud, unfocused, and confident in the only way beginners usually are. They played shows. They recorded songs. And eventually, someone actually listened. In 1993, Melody Maker reviewed the band with a sentence that would age far better than intended. A daft, punky thrash. It was meant as an insult. It worked like a diagnosis. They didn't respond. They didn't explain. They kept the phrase, dropped the guitars, and quietly started over.
Why are we grinning?
No announcement, no farewell tour. Just two musicians realizing that failure, when properly named, can be recycled. Homework didn't introduce itself. It assumed you were already listening. The album was raw, mechanical, and unapologetically repetitive. Not because it ran out of ideas, but because it trusted one idea enough to repeat it endlessly. Daft Punk. Around the world. Tracks built on loops so obvious they stopped sounding simple and started sounding stubborn. At a time when electronic music still felt the need to justify its future, Daft Punk acted like the future had already arrived and was slightly annoyed you were late. No lyrics to guide you, no narrative to hold your hand, just beats, filters, and patterns that refuse to adapt for comfort. Homework didn't ask for love, it asked for tolerance. After Homework, Daft Punk could have refined the formula, gone darker, more serious, more respectable. They didn't choose these. They chose pop. Discovery was bright, melodic, and emotionally open, almost aggressively so. Synth smiled, bass lines danced, and irony quietly left the room. This was an album that refused to hide its influences. Disco, funk, soft rock, nothing was filtered out for credibility. By 2002, the industry had caught up. One More Time earned a Grammy nomination.
For us, the important thing and what we consider to be success is being able to enjoy ourselves and have fun doing music, making music. And having sold 2 million copies of the album, the first album, is a very great gift, and we're very fortunate and very lucky for that. But the success in itself is really more about trying to do something or trying to have fun and on trying to make the music you want to and succeeding and being happy with that.
Electronic music, once suspicious and slightly underground, was now being evaluated by people in suits. Approval arrived. The helmet stayed.
Time will tell.
One More Time didn't just change Daft Punk's trajectory. It proved that electronic music could be joyful, unashamed, and still impossible to ignore. If Homework demanded endurance, Discovery offered pleasure and asked you to take it seriously. By 2003, Discovery had already done its job. The songs worked. The audience was there. The helmets had become permanent. At that point, most artists would start planning the next album. Daft Punk chose a different problem to solve. What if the album didn't need promotion? What if the album was the film? That idea became Interstella 5555, the 5 Tori of the 5 Ikre 5 Tar 5 Istom, a full-length animated movie built entirely around the Discovery track list. No dialogue, no traditional script, just music carrying the entire narrative. To make it work, Daft Punk collaborated with Leiji Matsumoto, a legendary Japanese manga artist known for space operas and melancholic sci-fi worlds. The result looked less like a music video project and more like a broadcast from another cultural orbit. Blue-skinned musicians, alien record labels, kidnapping, identity, manipulation, all explained without anyone speaking a word. Each song became a scene. Each scene extended the album's mythology. At this point, the distinction between album and concept was quietly disappearing, because Interstella 5555 wasn't really a film adaptation. It was proof that the album had already been a story all along. After Discovery, expectations were specific: bright melodies, clean production, pop structures wrapped in futuristic aesthetics. In other words, people expected more Discovery. That wasn't the plan. In 2005, Daft Punk released Human After All, a record built on distortion, repetition, and very little patience. Most of the album was reportedly written and recorded in about 6 weeks, which sounded less like careful design and more like controlled friction. Tracks like Robot Rock and Technologic leaned heavily into mechanical loops. Minimal changes, minimal melody, maximum insistence. For listeners expecting another polished pop experiment, the album felt unfinished. Critics called it repetitive. Some called it lazy, but repetition had always been part of the system. This time, it just stopped pretending to be subtle. Human After All wasn't trying to be comfortable, it was trying to be direct. And at the time, that difference wasn't exactly appreciated. By the mid-2000s, the situation was slightly confusing. Discovery had become a classic. Human After All had become debated. The catalog existed. The reputation was intact, but the direction wasn't entirely clear. Then came the tour. In 2006, Daft Punk returned to the stage with a new live concept that looked less like a concert and more like a controlled system. The centerpiece was a glowing pyramid. Inside it, 2 silhouettes, surrounded by machines. The set list didn't follow album order. It followed energy. Songs from Homework, Discovery, and Human After All were broken apart, reassembled, and layered on top of each other. Harder, better, faster, stronger collided with Around the World. Robot Rock fused with older material. Instead of playing the past was being remixed in real time. The tour eventually became Alive 2007, a live album that sounded less like documentation and more like reconstruction. Critics who had questioned Human After All started hearing those songs differently, because on stage, the repetition made sense. The system had revealed its final form. Records created the material. The stage rewrote the meaning. After Live 2007, the system had proven something important. The music worked, the mythology worked, the live shows worked. At that point, expanding into another medium wasn't a risk. It was the next logical experiment. In 2010, Daft Punk composed the soundtrack for Tron Legacy. This time, the goal wasn't a concept album. The goal was world building. Electronic textures were still there, but now they shared space with a full orchestra, recorded with more than 80 musicians. Analog synths met cinematic strings. Club rhythms met film structure. The result sounded bigger than their previous work, but also more restrained. Because in film scoring, the music isn't the main character. The world is. Interestingly, the robots appeared inside the film itself. Briefly, quietly, almost as background figures. 2 helmeted DJs inside a digital nightclub.
I believed in users once before.
It was a small cameo, but it reinforced the mythology. The robots weren't visiting Hollywood. They already belonged to that universe. By the early 2000s, electronic music had changed. What once sounded futuristic had become normal. Festival stages were filled with DJs. Digital production was everywhere. The machine had won. So Daft Punk did something slightly unexpected. Instead of pushing further into the digital future, they turned around and looked backward. The result was Random Access Memories, an album built not on software, but on musicians, live drums, analog synthesizers, session players. The production referenced the late 70s and early 80s, disco, funk, and studio craftsmanship from an era when recording itself was an art form. Collaborators included Nile Rodgers, Pharrell Williams, and Giorgio Moroder, figures whose careers had shaped the very sound Daft Punk was now referencing.
To do an album as if the internet never existed. It's time to have something new in the dance world.
I never knew how live instrumentation was recorded before. I didn't know that you set up different microphones in front of guitar amplifiers to get different sound, and just the vibes there, you just feel a presence.
To see the looks on their faces as they listened back to some of the recordings they had done when I was in the studio, to see that joy on their face.
Thomas was sort of at the controls, but he would constantly be looking back. Like he would do something, but he would always kind of check in with Guy-Man, and Guy-Man would say like 2 more bars of that, or not like that.
This is a chance to do what every great artist wants to do, is to offer their audience a chance to be elevated to a new intensity of emotion.
It's crazy because, on 2 sides of the Atlantic, we were both like in the same place. Like, let's go back to that magical time where music and the liveliness of music is what moved people.
The standout track, Get Lucky, became unavoidable. Radio, festivals, streaming platforms, it was everywhere.
She's up all night for good fun. I'm up all night to get lucky.
Ironically, the album that celebrated human performance arrived from 2 musicians most people never saw. At the Grammy Awards in 2014, Random Access Memories won Album of the Year.
And the Grammy goes to Random Access Memories, Daft Punk.
Featured artists, Julian Casablancas, DJ Falcon, Todd Edwards.
For a project built around nostalgia and craftsmanship, the recognition felt almost inevitable. But the interesting part wasn't the awards. It was the timing. Because after reaching their largest audience, Daft Punk did what they had always done best. They stepped back.
Wow, he really has no idea. Hey, want to take a shower with me?
Sure. Man, this is a pretty sweet gig. Like being a member of Daft Punk.
Look at this old Casio keyboard from the 1980s that I have found. Watch what happens when I push this demo button.
Hello, Daft Punk. Great song. Here's a Grammy.
Oh ho!
You know, it's funny. Until you spoke, I did not know we were French.
After Random Access Memories, the expectation was obvious. Another album, another tour, another expansion of the system. Instead, very little happened. The music industry had already labeled Daft Punk one of the most influential electronic acts of their generation. The Grammys had confirmed it. The audience had confirmed it. There was nothing left to prove. So the next move wasn't production, it was absence. Between 2014 and 2020, Daft Punk released almost nothing as a duo. No album, no tour, only occasional appearances through collaborations, like The Weeknd's tracks Starboy and I Feel It Coming. The sound was still recognizable. The helmets were still there, but the main project remained quiet. For most artists, silence means momentum is fading. For Daft Punk, silence had always been part of the system. Less visibility meant more mythology. Every year without a release made the previous work feel slightly larger. In 2021, the project ended with a short video titled Epilogue. No interviews, no farewell tour, no explanation, just a desert. Two figures walking, one stops. The system shuts down. For a project built on control, the ending felt appropriately precise. The music stayed. The mythology stayed. The signal simply stopped transmitting.
Sorti 2 maxi sur un label écossais qui s'appelle Soma et les maxi.
Don't people ever expect to see your faces?
No, we don't want to be famous for, physically. So we just want to spread our music and share the music we make. Physical appearance is totally irrelevant.
I'm Charles. I grew up next door to you.
Oh God!
Qui sont intéressants, qui font de la bonne musique, t'en as qui font croire qu'ils font de la bonne musique alors qu'ils font rien, t'as toutes les possibilités imaginables quoi, c'est comme rencontrer n'importe qui dans n'importe quel milieu.
So I said, so why is Thomas doing it? Oh, he said, he would hear the difference.
It's kind of ironic. Two androids are bringing soul back to music.
Grammy goes to...
And the Grammy goes to... Random Access Memories.
Daft Punk. Featuring Pharrell Williams.
Get lucky. Daft Punk.
On the behalf of the robots, of course, they want to thank their families.
2 robots called me and asked me to make an album. This is a legend. This is a labor of love. We are all so grateful. God bless you.
Wow, I might use this live.
It was a good thing that he said that.
And okay, do it again, do it again, do it again. It was like over and over and over and over again, which is the right way to do it.
She's up all night for good fun. I'm up all night to get lucky.
Ever after work is over.
For nearly 3 decades, the system stayed consistent. Music first, identity second, mystery always. From small clubs in the 90s to festival stages that looked like machines themselves, the helmets rarely changed, the structure rarely broke. Records created the material, the stage reshaped it. And somewhere along the way, 2 musicians became an idea. This is Soundscape Stories, where legends are told, one signal at a time.